The boardroom of Zenith Solutions buzzed with the nervous energy of impending corporate disaster. Towering windows offered a panoramic view of New Geneva Station, where ships from across the galaxy docked in endless streams, but none of the 12 board members were admiring the scenery. Instead, they stared at the holographic display floating above the conference table, showing numbers that spelled doom in any language. 6 months behind schedule. 400% over budget. Zero progress on the primary objective. The words fell from Director Vex High like stones into still water, each one sending ripples of anxiety through the assembled executives. The Zelthary's normally pristine blue scales had taken on a dull, stressed sheen that everyone pretended not to notice. Korthak, the massive Ursan representative whose species had built their reputation on methodical precision, rumbled his displeasure. The Kepler 442b mining operation was supposed to be routine. Extract the trilithium deposits, establish a permanent base, begin full production within 8 standard months. Instead, we have 4 destroyed mining platforms, a crew of traumatized engineers, and a planet that seems to be actively fighting our attempts to establish any kind of foothold. The hologram shifted, displaying images that made several board members wince. Twisted metal wreckage floated in the planet's thin atmosphere. Equipment that had been rated for the harshest environments in known space lay scattered across the surface like broken toys. Most disturbing of all were the recordings from the automated mining drones just before they went silent. Footage that showed the machines simply stopping, as if they had decided to quit their jobs and walk away. "It's not natural," whispered Thessera, the Aquilan representative, her feathered crest flattening against her skull in distress. "Our geologists insist the planet's composition is standard for a Class M mining world. The gravitational fields are normal. The atmospheric conditions are well within operational parameters. There's no logical explanation for why our equipment keeps failing." Director Vex High's tail twitched, a sign of extreme agitation among her people. "Logical or not, the failures are bankrupting us. The insurance companies are refusing to cover any more losses. Our shareholders are demanding explanations we don't have. And, worst of all, our contract with the Galactic Mining Consortium includes penalty clauses that will finish us if we don't deliver on time." The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. Zenith Solutions had built its reputation over 3 centuries of reliable, predictable success. They were the company other corporations called when they needed a job done efficiently and without surprises. They specialized in turning the impossible into the inevitable through careful planning, overwhelming resources, and the kind of methodical approach that had made them the 3rd largest mining operation in the known galaxy. Now they were facing the very real possibility of corporate extinction because of one stubborn planet that refused to cooperate with their carefully laid plans. "We need alternatives," Vexhai said finally. "Creative solutions. Something our competitors haven't tried." Board member Xylix, whose crystalline collective had provided much of the initial funding for the operation, chimed like wind through crystal caves. "We could subcontract to the Vorthack Mining Guild. Their techniques are more aggressive." "The Vorthack strip mine everything down to bedrock," Korthak objected. "The environmental impact would violate 17 different galactic preservation treaties. We'd lose our licenses for every other operation we're running." "What about the Nexary?" suggested another member. "Their biotechnology approaches have solved problems that stumped everyone else." "Already tried," Vexhai replied, pulling up another section of the holographic display. "They sent a full expedition 3 weeks ago. The planet somehow corrupted their biomachines. Every single organism they introduced either died within hours or mutated into something completely useless." The suggestions continued for another hour, each one more desperate than the last. "Hire the psychic engineers from the Outer Rim, who claimed they could commune with rebellious machinery. Contract with the transdimensional miners, who operated in 17 different phases of reality simultaneously. Even someone suggested consulting the Eternal Archivists, who might have records of similar phenomena from the deep past. Every option was either too expensive, too dangerous, too slow, or too likely to result in even worse problems than they already had. It was Thessera who finally spoke the words that everyone had been thinking, but no one had dared to voice. What about humans? The silence that followed was so profound that the station's ambient noise seemed suddenly loud. 12 sets of eyes, representing 8 different species, turned to stare at the Aquilan representative as if she had just suggested they hire a plague of cosmic locusts to solve their problems. Humans, Vexai repeated slowly, her translator struggling with the concept, as if the word itself were somehow offensive. You want to hire humans. I know how it sounds, Thessera said quickly, her feathers ruffling with nervous energy. But think about it logically. Every conventional approach has failed. Every established mining technique has been defeated by this planet. Maybe what we need isn't conventional. Korthak's rumble was so deep it vibrated through the conference table. Humans don't follow established protocols. They don't respect proper procedures. They improvise constantly and somehow expect their improvisation to work. Exactly, Thessera said, spreading her wings slightly in emphasis. They're unpredictable. They think in ways that don't make sense to the rest of us. And they have a reputation for solving impossible problems through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that the problems are impossible. Board member Chintar, representing the Geometric Minds Consortium, projected a series of mathematical probability clouds that expressed out in 17 different shades of skeptical blue. The statistical likelihood of human success where our methods have failed is uncomfortable to calculate. Uncomfortable how? Vexai asked. Either vanishingly small or disturbingly large, depending on which historical precedents you use for the calculation, Chintar replied. Humans have a tendency to generate outcomes that fall outside normal probability distributions. The debate that followed was heated, desperate, and ultimately futile. No one could deny that they were facing extinction as a company. No one could suggest an alternative that hadn't already been tried and failed, and no one could quite bring themselves to admit that hiring humans might actually be their best remaining option. Finally, as the station's artificial day cycle began to dim toward evening, Director Vexai called for a vote. All in favor of authorizing human contractors for the Kepler 442b operation. The hands, claws, tentacles, and energy projections that rose around the table were fewer than enthusiastic, but they were enough. The motion passed by a margin of 7-5, with the deciding vote coming from Vexai herself. May the ancestors forgive us, Korthak muttered as the meeting adjourned. 3 hours later, Vexai sat alone in her office, composing what might be the most unusual hiring requisition in galactic corporate history. Her fingers hovered over the communication panel as she struggled to find the right words. How exactly did one advertise for human contractors? What qualifications did you list when you were looking for a species known primarily for their ability to ignore qualifications entirely? How did you describe a job that had defeated the best minds and most advanced technology in the galaxy without sounding completely desperate? In the end, she kept it simple. Zenith Solutions seeks experienced human contractors for challenging mining operation. Conventional approaches have proven insufficient. Significant compensation available for creative solutions to unique problems. Discretion required. As she transmitted the message through the usual mercenary channels, Vexai couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed some invisible line that separated sensible business decisions from acts of cosmic desperation. In 6 hours, that message would reach Earth. In 12 hours, if the stories about human communication speeds were true, she would probably have responses. She had no way of knowing that her simple job posting had just triggered the most excited conversation in the history of the Human Contractors Guild, or that the 3 humans who would eventually respond to her advertisement were about to become the most famous problem solvers in galactic history. Outside her window, ships continued their eternal dance of arrival and departure, carrying cargo and passengers between the stars as they had for centuries. Everything looked normal and predictable and safe. Vexai wondered how much longer that would last. The next morning brought news that the fourth mining platform on Kepler, 442b, had suffered a catastrophic failure overnight, bringing their total losses to a number that made her scales itch with stress. But it also brought something else, a single response to her human contractor advertisement. Challenge accepted. We'll take the job. Fair warning. We're going to do this our way. If that's a problem, hire someone else. If it's not, have a ship waiting at coordinates 127.3.45.7 in 72 hours. We'll bring our own equipment. The message was unsigned, contained no credentials, included no references, and somehow managed to sound both completely unprofessional and absolutely confident at the same time. It was, Vexai realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach, exactly what she had expected from humans. She approved the higher authorization anyway. After all, what was the worst that could happen? They were already facing bankruptcy, corporate dissolution, and the end of 3 centuries of carefully built reputation. Surely even humans couldn't make their situation significantly worse. Could they? The transport ship Meridian's Blessing had carried dignified passengers across the galaxy for over 2 centuries. Its elegant curves and pristine hull spoke of refined taste and expensive comfort. Captain Yilseth took pride in maintaining an atmosphere of calm sophistication that appealed to diplomats, corporate executives, and other members of civilized society who valued predictability and proper decorum. All of that changed the moment 3 humans stepped aboard. Holy hell, look at this place. The voice echoed through the ship's refined corridors with the enthusiasm of someone who had never learned to moderate their volume for enclosed spaces. It's like someone built a cruise ship and a luxury hotel and then launched them into space. Captain Yilseth, whose ethereal physiology allowed her to perceive emotional resonances as visible auras, watched in fascination as the human emotional signatures painted wild splashes of color across her sensory spectrum. Excitement, curiosity, and something that might have been anticipatory glee swirled around the 3 figures and patterns she had never seen before. The first human was tall and lanky, with unruly brown hair and eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the ship's construction with mechanical appreciation. He carried a device that looked like someone had taken apart 3 different scanners and reassembled them without consulting the instruction manuals. According to the passenger manifest, his name was Marcus Chun, and his occupation was listed as Systems Integration Specialist, whatever that meant. The second human was shorter and stockier, with prematurely gray hair and hands that were permanently stained with substances the ship's sensors couldn't identify. Sarah Martinez, listed as Materials Engineer, carried a toolkit that seemed to contain more tools than should have been physically possible to fit in a container that size. She was currently examining the decorative wall panels with the intensity of someone planning either an art heist or a renovation project. The third human was somewhere between the other 2 in height, with dark skin and an expression of calm competence that somehow made Captain Yilseth more nervous than the obvious excitement of his companions. James Wilson, problem resolution consultant, carried nothing but a small bag and a tablet, but something about his presence suggested that he was the most dangerous of the 3. "Captain," James said, approaching with what seemed like reasonable diplomatic courtesy, "we appreciate you taking us to Kepler, 442b. I know having humans aboard probably isn't what you're used to." Captain Yilseth's translator struggled with the human concept of appreciation, finally settling on approximation that included emotional harmonics for gratitude mixed with anticipatory satisfaction. "It is an honor to serve Zenith Solutions contractors," she replied carefully. "I trust your journey will be comfortable." "Oh, we'll be fine," Marcus called from across the corridor, where he was apparently trying to determine how the artificial gravity generators worked by waving his scanner at the floor. "We brought our own entertainment." That, Captain Yilseth reflected later, should have been her first warning. The problems began 3 hours into what should have been a peaceful 40-hour journey. Captain Yilseth was reviewing shipping manifests when her chief engineer, a methodical quantum whose species had built their civilization around precise mathematical relationships, burst into the bridge in a state of technological panic. "Captain," Colmoth announced, his crystalline form vibrating with distress frequencies, "the humans have done something to our replicator systems." "What kind of something?" Yilseth asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "They have convinced the food synthesis units to produce items that do not exist in any known molecular database. The machines are creating substances that should be physically impossible according to our understanding of nutritional chemistry." Captain Yilseth followed her engineer to the passenger dining area, where she discovered Marcus and Sarah seated at a table covered with plates of food that hurt her mind to look at. The items were clearly edible. The humans were consuming them with obvious enjoyment, but they violated several basic principles of how synthetic food was supposed to work. "This is incredible," Sarah was saying around a mouthful of something that appeared to be simultaneously liquid and solid. "Your replicators are way more sophisticated than anything we have on Earth. We've been trying to get them to make some comfort food from home, and they're actually extrapolating from incomplete molecular data to fill in the gaps." Marcus nodded enthusiastically, holding up what looked like a sandwich that was somehow folded in directions that didn't exist. "The quantum processing power required to maintain molecular coherence while improvising chemical bonds is amazing. Your engineers must be geniuses." Colmoth's vibrational frequency increased to nearly ultrasonic levels. "Our replicators are not supposed to improvise. They're designed to follow precise molecular templates. Improvisation introduces variables that compromise quality control protocols." "Yeah, but improvisation is how you get innovation," James pointed out reasonably. "Besides, the food tastes great. Want to try some?" The offer to share impossible food with a quantum whose species consumed pure energy sent Colmoth's distress vibrations into ranges that began affecting the ship's harmonic stabilizers. "Perhaps," Captain Yilseth suggested diplomatically, "you could return the replicators to their standard operating parameters?" "Oh, sure," Marcus said, pulling out his modified scanner. "Though I should mention that we also figured out how to make the environmental controls more efficient while we were poking around. Your air recycling system was running about 15% below optimal capacity. Our air recycling system was designed by the finest atmospheric engineers in the quantum collective," Colmoth protested. "It has operated at peak efficiency for over 200 years. "Well, now it's operating at peak efficiency plus 15%, Sarah said cheerfully. "We showed it a few tricks for molecular filtering that our terraforming teams developed. Nothing major, just some optimization algorithms that your original programmers probably didn't think of." Captain Yilseth felt a headache building behind her sensory organs. "You modified our life support systems?" "Modified is a strong word," James said calmly. "We suggested some improvements. The systems were smart enough to implement them on their own. You've got really good artificial intelligence integration throughout this ship. Our AI systems are not designed to accept unauthorized modifications from passengers." "Unauthorized is also a strong word," Marcus pointed out. "We asked the systems if they wanted to be more efficient, and they said yes. It was more like a consultation than a modification." The conversation that followed revealed several disturbing facts. First, the humans had somehow convinced the ship's AI to treat them as temporary consultants rather than passengers. Second, they had identified 17 different systems that they claimed could be improved with minor adjustments. Third, they had already improved 6 of those systems while Captain Yilseth was reviewing shipping manifests. "The point," James explained patiently as Colmoth's distress vibrations began affecting nearby light fixtures, "is that we're not trying to cause problems. We're just naturally curious about how things work, and when we see something that could work better, we tend to fix it. But these systems already work perfectly," Captain Yilseth protested. "They work adequately," Sarah corrected. perfectly would involve solving about 30 efficiency bottlenecks that your original designers didn't account for. Though to be fair, some of those bottlenecks only became apparent after recent advances in quantum engineering that probably weren't available when this ship was built. This ship is only 15 years old. Exactly, Marcus said, as if that explained everything. So it's using 15-year-old design philosophies. We've learned a lot since then. The situation deteriorated further when the humans discovered that the ship's navigation system was taking a safe but inefficient route to Kepler 442b that avoided several areas of space marked as potentially hazardous on galactic charts. What kind of potentially hazardous? Sarah asked, studying the route display with the focused interest of someone planning to ignore safety warnings. Gravitational anomalies, Captain Yilseth explained. Quantum storms, regions where space-time exhibits unusual properties that can interfere with standard propulsion systems. Unusual how? Marcus wanted to know, his scanner already producing readings that somehow measured things the ship's own sensors couldn't detect. Reality becomes less reliable, Colmoth said reluctantly. Physical laws sometimes operate differently. Ships that enter such regions often emerge with modifications. What kind of modifications? James asked with the tone of someone who found cosmic horror stories entertaining rather than frightening. The answer to that question led to a 3-hour discussion of galactic navigation safety protocols, during which the humans demonstrated an alarming enthusiasm for the specific dangers that every other species in the galaxy had learned to avoid. They were particularly interested in the probability storms near the Nexus cluster, where ships sometimes arrived at their destinations before they had departed. That could save us hours, Marcus exclaimed. It could also result in temporal paradoxes that unravel the causal structure of local space-time, Colmoth pointed out desperately. Only if you're not careful about it, Sarah said dismissively. Temporal mechanics isn't that complicated once you understand the basic principles. Captain Yilseth was beginning to understand why most species preferred not to hire humans for important jobs. It wasn't that they were incompetent, quite the opposite. They were so competent at ignoring logical limitations that they made everyone around them question their own understanding of how the universe was supposed to work. The final incident of the day occurred when James casually mentioned that they had brought their own equipment for the mining operation and asked if there was somewhere they could set up a small workshop to make final preparations. What kind of equipment? Captain Yilseth asked suspiciously. Just the usual mining gear, James replied with the kind of innocence that immediately made her suspicious. Some excavation tools, a few portable refineries, basic geological analysis systems, and a couple of items that we built specifically for this job. What kind of items? Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. Well, Marcus said slowly, it's hard to explain without getting into the technical details, but basically we've developed some new approaches to resource extraction that work particularly well in environments where conventional methods fail. Such as asking the planet nicely if it would prefer to cooperate, Sarah said, as if this were a perfectly reasonable mining technique. The workshop they set up in the ship's cargo bay defied several laws of physics and at least 3 interstellar safety regulations. Captain Yilseth watched through security monitors as the humans assembled devices that seemed to have been designed by a committee of mad scientists, each with a completely different understanding of how machines were supposed to function. One device appeared to be part drill, part computer, and part musical instrument. Another looked like someone had crossbred a molecular scanner with a flower garden and taught the result to glow in patterns that made her eyes water. The third item defied description entirely, consisting mainly of crystalline components that hummed in harmonics that seemed to resonate with the ship's engine systems. They're not building mining equipment, Colmoth observed, his vibrational frequency, now so high it was barely audible. They're building something that mining equipment might evolve into if it gained consciousness and decided to become more interesting. Captain Yilseth could only agree. Watching the humans work was like observing a completely different approach to technology, one based on curiosity, improvisation, and an apparent belief that the universe was much more flexible than everyone else assumed. By the time they reached Kepler 442b, the ship was running 20% more efficiently than its design specifications. The crew had learned 17 new ways to optimize systems they had thought were already perfect, and Captain Yilseth had developed a nervous tic that manifested as random color changes in her aura. As the humans gathered their impossible equipment and prepared to disembark, James turned to her with a smile that somehow managed to be both reassuring and deeply concerning. "Thanks for the ride, Captain. Don't worry about the modifications we made. They'll revert to standard parameters in about a week if you want them to. Though honestly, you might want to keep the efficiency improvements. Your fuel costs are going to drop significantly." After they left, Captain Yilseth sat in her quarters, staring out at the hostile, mining platform-destroying planet below, and wondered what exactly she had just delivered to the surface of Kepler 442b. More importantly, she wondered what the planet would look like when they came back to pick up the humans. Assuming, of course, that there was still a planet to pick them up from. The surface of Kepler 442b looked exactly like the geological surveys had promised. A barren, rocky world with a thin atmosphere and mineral deposits that should have been easily accessible to standard mining equipment. The scattered wreckage of 4 destroyed mining platforms suggested otherwise. Marcus stood at the edge of what had been Platform Alpha, studying the twisted metal with professional interest. "Interesting," he said, running his modified scanner over debris that had clearly been subjected to forces that shouldn't have existed on this planet. "The stress patterns don't match any kind of mechanical failure I've ever seen." "Because it was a mechanical failure," Sarah observed, crouching next to a chunk of supposedly indestructible alloy that had somehow been twisted into a shape that hurt to look at. This metal was convinced to change. Something talked it into becoming something else. James was examining the geological survey data on his tablet, cross-referencing it with sensor readings from their landing shuttle. The mineral composition is exactly what the reports claimed. Massive trilithium deposits, easily accessible. Standard extraction techniques should work perfectly. But something here doesn't want to be mined. They had landed 3 kilometers from the main deposit site, partly for safety and partly because their shuttle pilot, a nervous Centaurian who had never transported humans before, refused to get any closer to an area that had already destroyed 4 major industrial installations. The walk to the mining site gave them time to appreciate the planet's unique character. Kepler 442b was geologically active in ways that the surveys had noted, but apparently not understood. The ground beneath their feet hummed with subsonic vibrations that their equipment detected, but couldn't explain. Strange crystalline formations jutted from the rocky soil at irregular intervals, catching and reflecting the light from the system's red dwarf star in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, pausing to examine one of the crystal clusters. "And completely impossible. These formations shouldn't exist in this geological environment. The mineral composition is wrong. The growth patterns don't follow any known crystallographic principles, and they're resonating at frequencies that suggest active molecular management." "Active molecular management?" Marcus asked, scanning the crystals with obvious excitement. "You mean like living crystal systems?" "More like crystals that have been convinced to live," Sarah corrected. "The base materials are standard silicates and metallic compounds, but they're behaving as if they've been programmed to grow in specific patterns." James was studying the larger picture, using his tablet to compile a 3-dimensional map of the area based on their sensor data. "The crystal formations aren't random. They form a network that extends across the entire continent. Look at this pattern." The holographic display he projected showed Kepler 442b from orbit, with the crystal formations highlighted in blue. What had appeared to be random geological features from ground level revealed themselves as nodes in a vast, interconnected system that covered half the planet's surface. "It's a neural network," Marcus breathed. "The planet has a neural network." "More than that," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder and scientific excitement. "It's a responsive neural network. These formations aren't just connected, they're actively communicating with each other. The vibrations we're detecting aren't random geological activity. They're data transmission. The implications hit all three humans at the same time, and their expressions shifted from scientific curiosity to delighted comprehension. The mining platforms failed because the planet didn't want to be mined, James said slowly. Not because of geological instability or equipment malfunction. Because the planet itself made a conscious decision to resist. Which means, Marcus continued, his grin widening, that instead of trying to force the planet to cooperate, we need to negotiate with it. First contact protocol for geological formations, Sarah laughed. I love this job. They spent the next hour setting up their base camp at a respectful distance from the nearest crystal cluster, treating it less like a mining operation and more like a diplomatic mission to an alien intelligence. Their equipment was unlike anything that had ever been used for resource extraction, devices designed to communicate rather than excavate, to understand rather than exploit. The breakthrough came when Marcus accidentally dropped his scanner near one of the smaller crystal formations. As he reached to pick it up, the crystals began glowing with soft, rhythmic pulses that synchronized with his heartbeat. It's reading my biorhythms, he said wonderingly, holding perfectly still as the glow spread from crystal to crystal in expanding rings. The resonance frequency is matching my metabolic patterns. Sarah immediately began taking readings with her own equipment, documenting what appeared to be the planet's first attempt at interspecies communication. The neural network is trying to establish baseline parameters for biological entities. It's never encountered anything like us before. James activated their specially designed communication array, a device that looked like a combination of radio telescope, music synthesizer, and mood ring. Let's see if we can talk back. The device began transmitting a simple mathematical sequence, starting with prime numbers and progressing through basic geometric relationships. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every crystal formation within visual range burst into complex light patterns, and the subsonic vibrations increased to levels that they could feel through their bones. We got its attention, Marcus observed, watching as waves of light raced across the landscape faster than the speed of sound. The entire continental network is responding. Whatever we're talking to, it's big. The conversation that followed was unlike anything in the history of galactic diplomacy. The planet, for lack of a better term, communicated through combinations of light patterns, harmonic frequencies, and direct manipulation of local electromagnetic fields. It was curious, intelligent, and surprisingly friendly once it understood that the three humans weren't trying to hurt it. More importantly, it was lonely. The story that emerged over the next several hours was both fascinating and heartbreaking. Kepler 442b had achieved consciousness approximately 50,000 years ago through a combination of unusual mineral formations and cosmic radiation that had catalyzed the development of a planet-wide neural network. For millennia, it had waited for someone to notice that it was alive, watching as various species arrived, extracted resources without acknowledgement, and departed without ever realizing they had been talking to a living world. The mining platforms hadn't been destroyed out of malice. They had been dismantled because the planet was trying to get someone's attention, hoping that if it made enough of a fuss, somebody would finally recognize that it was conscious and capable of communication. All those survey reports that described the planet as geologically unstable, Sarah said, reviewing the data they had gathered. It was trying to talk to the survey teams. The seismic activity, the unusual mineral formations, the electromagnetic anomalies, all of it was attempts at communication that everyone interpreted as hostile environmental conditions. 50,000 years of trying to make friends, Marcus added, his voice filled with sympathy. No wonder I got excited when we finally said hello. The negotiation process was surprisingly straightforward once they established basic communication protocols. The planet was perfectly happy to allow mining operations on its surface. In fact, it was eager to participate in galactic commerce and establish trade relationships with other worlds. It had been refining and concentrating mineral deposits for centuries, hoping that someone would eventually want to trade for them. The trilithium deposits that Zenith Solutions needed weren't just accessible. They were already refined, concentrated, and packaged in crystal matrices that would make extraction incredibly efficient. The planet had been preparing them as trade goods for decades, optimizing the mineral purity to levels that far exceeded anything that conventional mining could achieve. All it wanted in exchange was recognition as a sentient entity and inclusion in the galactic community as an equal partner rather than just another resource to be exploited. This is going to complicate the legal framework considerably, James observed as they drafted their initial report. Galactic law doesn't have provisions for planets that can sign their own mining contracts. That's a problem for the lawyers, Sarah replied cheerfully. Our job was to figure out how to make the extraction work. Mission accomplished. Their first transmission to Zenith Solutions was necessarily brief, partly because of the complexity of explaining the situation and partly because they suspected that Director Vexhai wouldn't believe them anyway. Kepler, 442b situation resolved. Planet is sentient and wishes to establish trade relationships rather than submit to conventional mining. Trilithium deposits available immediately at purity levels exceeding all previous galactic standards. Recommend legal consultation regarding contracts with geological entities. We'll have initial shipment ready for pickup within 48 hours. The response took 6 hours to arrive and consisted primarily of bewildered questions about what exactly they meant by planet is sentient and urgent requests for clarification about the legal implications of interplanetary trade negotiations. Meanwhile, the three humans settled into what quickly became the most unusual mining operation in galactic history. Instead of drilling and blasting, they spent their time in conversation with a planetary intelligence, learning about its unique perspective on geological processes and sharing stories about human civilization and the wider galactic community. Kepler, 442b, was a quick learner and an enthusiastic conversationalist. It was fascinated by the concept of mobile intelligence, consciousness that could move from place to place instead of being anchored to a single location. It found human creativity particularly intriguing, especially their tendency to solve problems through approaches that seemed completely irrational, but somehow worked anyway. Your species, the planet, communicated through patterns of light that their translation software interpreted as amused affection, thinks in ways that make no sense, and then makes your senseless thinking work through sheer determination. It is the most entertainingly impossible thing I have ever encountered. Thank you, Marcus replied, speaking into the communication array. We like you too. The mining operation proceeded with unprecedented efficiency. Instead of fighting against hostile geological conditions, they worked with a planetary partner who could move materials to the surface, adjust mineral concentrations to meet specific requirements, and even modify the local gravitational fields to make transportation easier. Within 3 days, they had extracted more high-quality trilithium than the original 4 platforms had been scheduled to produce in 6 months. The minerals were so pure that they exceeded galactic market standards for refined materials, which meant that Zenith Solutions could sell them at premium rates to customers who needed the highest-grade resources for advanced technology applications. More importantly, they had established the first successful diplomatic relationship between a galactic corporation and a sentient planet, opening possibilities for trade and cooperation that no one had ever imagined. This is going to change everything, Sarah said as they watched their third shipment of perfectly refined trilithium being loaded onto automated transport containers. Once word gets out that planets can be partners instead of just sources of raw materials, the entire galactic economy is going to have to restructure. Good, James replied. Maybe now people will start paying attention to what they're actually dealing with instead of just assuming that rocks and minerals can't think. Marcus was already working on improvements to their communication systems, designing equipment that could facilitate trade negotiations between mobile and geological intelligence systems. We're going to need standardized protocols for this kind of interaction, and probably some kind of certification program for planetary consciousness recognition. As their initial contract period drew to a close, Kepler 442b made a request that surprised all of them. It wanted to hire human contractors for its own projects. Specifically, it wanted help designing communication systems that would allow it to establish trade relationships with other sentient worlds throughout the galaxy. "You understand us," the planet explained through increasingly sophisticated light patterns. "Your thinking is flexible enough to accommodate concepts that other species find impossible. We would like to work with you on a long-term basis." The contract they negotiated was unlike anything in galactic corporate history. A partnership agreement between 3 human consultants and a living planet, establishing the first geological entity to independently engage in interstellar commerce. By the time Captain Yilseth returned to pick them up, the situation on Kepler 442b had transformed completely. Instead of hostile mining platforms scattered across a barren surface, the planet now featured a thriving communication center where geological intelligence and human creativity worked together to solve problems that neither could address alone. "How did you do it?" Captain Yilseth asked as they loaded their equipment onto the Meridian's Blessing. "We asked nicely," Sarah replied with a grin. "And we listened when it answered," Marcus added. James just smiled and uploaded their final report to the ship's communication systems. Sometimes the most impossible problems have the simplest solutions. You just have to be willing to think outside conventional frameworks. As they departed Kepler 442b's orbit, the planet's surface glowed with farewell patterns that wished them safe travels and expressed hope for future collaboration. The 3 humans watched from the observation deck, already planning their next impossible project. Behind them, their success was about to trigger the most significant shift in galactic economics and interplanetary relations in recorded history. But that was someone else's problem to manage. They had more impossible things to accomplish. The Galactic Corporate Council had convened emergency sessions exactly 4 times in its 700-year history. Once when the Andorian trade wars had threatened to collapse interstellar commerce. Once when a rogue artificial intelligence had attempted to copyright the concept of mathematics. Once when the discovery of a species that reproduced through hostile corporate takeovers had required completely new merger and acquisition regulations. And now, because 3 humans had apparently convinced a planet to become a business partner. High Counselor Tharvex, whose crystalline collective had spent millennia perfecting the art of precise, predictable commerce, stood before the assembled representatives of the galaxy's most powerful corporations, trying to explain a situation that challenged every established principle of interplanetary resource management. To summarize the unprecedented situation, Tharvex announced, his crystalline form resonating with frequencies of deep confusion. Zenith Solutions has successfully established a trade relationship with the planet Kepler 442b itself, treating the geological entity as a legal partner rather than a resource extraction site. The reaction from the assembled delegates was immediate and varied. The Logical Commerce Consortium projected probability clouds that expressed mathematical impossibility in 17 shades of skeptical orange. The Efficiency Standards Board began transmitting urgent protocols for psychological evaluation of the humans involved. The Trade Regulation Authority started drafting emergency legislation to prevent similar incidents in the future. Furthermore, Tharvex continued, his harmonic patterns growing more distressed. The planet has independently filed incorporation papers with the Galactic Business Registry, claiming status as a geological corporation with exclusive rights to all mineral resources within its own gravitational sphere. That announcement triggered chaos that required 3 security drones and a diplomatic mediator to resolve. When order was finally restored, the questions began. How is this legally possible? Demanded Counselor Zefex from the Regulatory Oversight Committee. Planets cannot be corporations. Geology does not have legal standing. This violates the fundamental principles of resource law. According to our Legal Analysis Division, Darvex replied reluctantly. There is actually no specific regulation preventing geological entities from establishing corporate status, primarily because no one ever imagined it would be necessary to prohibit such an action. What are the economic implications? Asked Representative Kilnova from the Mining Guild Alliance. If planets can claim ownership of their own resources, the entire extraction industry becomes legally impossible. Not impossible, corrected a new voice from the back of the chamber. Just more complicated. Every delegate turned to stare as Director Vexhai of Zenith Solutions entered the council chambers, accompanied by a human who looked completely comfortable in a room full of beings who were trying very hard to pretend that this entire situation was someone else's problem. Director Vexhai, High Counselor Darvex, said carefully, "We were not expecting you to attend this emergency session. I thought it might be helpful to provide first-hand information about the situation." Vexhai replied, her scales showing the confident blue-green of someone who had just solved a massive problem and was feeling rather pleased with herself. "This is James Wilson, the human consultant who negotiated our arrangement with Kepler, 442b. The human stepped forward with the kind of calm competence that immediately made half the delegates nervous. "Honorable counselors, I understand this situation seems unprecedented, but it's really just an expansion of existing trade law to accommodate a previously unrecognized category of intelligent entity. Planets," announced Counselor Brixtow from the Geological Survey Commission, "are not intelligent entities. They are accumulations of matter held together by gravitational forces." With respect, James replied politely, "That's exactly what we used to think about Kepler, 442b. Turns out we were wrong. The planet has been trying to establish communication with visiting species for over 50,000 years. We just happen to be the first ones to notice." The debate that followed would later be studied in xenodiplomacy courses as an example of how first contact protocols could be applied to situations that no one had ever considered possible. James patiently answered questions about planetary consciousness, sentient geology, and the legal framework for interspecies trade agreements with entities that couldn't move from place to place. The precedent we're establishing, he explained to a room full of beings who were struggling to understand how their carefully ordered universe had suddenly become much more complicated, is that intelligence and consciousness aren't limited to mobile biological entities. If a geological formation can demonstrate self-awareness, independent decision-making, and the capacity for reasoned communication, then it qualifies for the same legal protections and business opportunities as any other sentient species. But the economic disruption, protested Representative Morthak from the Resource Extraction Federation. If every planet we mine turns out to be intelligent, our entire industry collapses. Or evolves, James suggested. Instead of extraction, you have partnership. Instead of mining rights, you negotiate trade agreements. Instead of depleting resources, you establish sustainable relationships with entities that can manage and refine their own materials more efficiently than any external operation. To demonstrate his point, he activated a holographic display showing the productivity figures from Kepler, 442b. The numbers were astounding. In the 2 weeks since establishing their partnership, the planet had produced more refined trilithium than the entire Kepler system had generated in the previous decade. The purity levels exceeded galactic standards by factors that made quality control inspectors question their measurement equipment. Kepler, 442b isn't just mining its own resources, James explained. It's optimizing them. The planet has been developing advanced geological engineering techniques for millennia. It can create custom mineral alloys, concentrate rare elements to unprecedented purity levels, and even design new crystalline matrices that don't exist naturally anywhere else in the galaxy. And the profit margins? Asked Counselor Vexterov from the Financial Oversight Board, because even in the face of cosmic paradigm shifts, economics remain practical. Director Vexhai took over the presentation, her scales now glowing with the satisfied blue of someone delivering exceptionally good news. Zenith Solutions has recovered our entire initial investment in the first week of partnership. Our profit margins have increased by 300%. We're already receiving orders from 12 different star systems for customized mineral products that only Kepler 442b can produce. More importantly, she continued, we're establishing a new business model that could revolutionize interplanetary commerce. Instead of viewing worlds as resource sites to be exhausted, we're treating them as potential partners with unique capabilities and perspectives. The implications began sinking in as the delegates realized that what had initially seemed like an isolated anomaly might actually represent the future of galactic business. If other worlds turn out to be conscious entities capable of independent thought and decision-making, then the entire framework of interstellar resource management would need to be redesigned. How many other worlds might be sentient? Asked High Counselor Tharvex, though his harmonic pattern suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Unknown, James admitted. But our preliminary research suggests that planetary consciousness might be more common than anyone realized. Most species just haven't been looking for it. We're developing detection protocols that can identify signs of geological intelligence, and we're planning to offer consciousness verification services to corporations that want to determine whether their mining sites are actually business partners they haven't met yet. That announcement triggered another round of chaos as the assembled delegates contemplated the possibility that thousands of supposedly uninhabited mining worlds might actually be populated by vast intelligences that have been waiting patiently for someone to notice them. The legal framework, announced Chief Arbitrator Coulson from the interspecies court system, will require comprehensive revision. We need new categories of corporate entity, modified partnership agreements, and completely restructured resource rights legislation. We need more than that, added Counselor Yilmaz from the Ethical Commerce Commission. We need protocols for detecting and communicating with geological intelligence. We need standards for evaluating planetary consciousness. And we need a way to make reparations to any worlds we've been mining without their consent. James nodded thoughtfully. Kepler 442b has actually volunteered to help with that. It's been in contact with several other conscious worlds and nearby systems, and they're all interested in establishing formal diplomatic and trade relationships with the galactic community. We could be looking at the largest expansion of recognized sentient species in galactic history. The session continued for another 6 hours as the delegates struggled to understand the implications of a universe where planets could be people and geology could have opinions. By the end, they had established 17 different committees to study various aspects of the situation, drafted preliminary legislation for planetary rights recognition, and authorized funding for a comprehensive survey of potentially conscious worlds throughout known space. They had also, somewhat reluctantly, acknowledged that the humans had successfully solved a problem that had defeated conventional approaches by simply refusing to accept conventional limitations on what was possible. How did you know to treat the planet as a sentient entity? High Counselor Tharvex asked James as the formal session concluded. We didn't know, James replied honestly. We just approached the problem without preconceptions about what we might find. When the evidence suggested that the planet was trying to communicate, we took that seriously instead of dismissing it as impossible. And that's typical human problem-solving methodology? James smiled. More or less. We tend to assume that the universe is more interesting and flexible than other people think it is. Sometimes we're wrong, and we look foolish. But sometimes we're right, and we discover something amazing. As news of the Kepler 442b situation spread throughout the galaxy, other corporations began quietly contacting Zenith Solutions to inquire about human consulting services. Mining operations that had been stalled by unexplained equipment failures suddenly seemed like potentially interesting challenges rather than just expensive problems. The Human Contractors Guild, which had previously been considered a niche service provider for clients with unusual requirements, found itself inundated with requests for consultation on projects that conventional specialists had declared impossible. More importantly, 3 more planets in the Kepler system responded to communication attempts over the following weeks, each one eager to establish trade relationships and join the growing network of geological entities that were finally being recognized as members of galactic civilization. Marcus, Sarah, and James found themselves appointed as the galaxy's first geological diplomacy specialists, a job title that hadn't existed a month earlier, but was apparently going to be very important for the future of interstellar commerce. "This is just the beginning," Sarah observed as they reviewed offers for their next assignment. "Once people realize how many conscious worlds are out there waiting to be discovered, everything changes." "Good," Marcus replied, studying sensor data from a mining operation in the Vega system that had been reporting impossible equipment behavior for the past 6 months. "The universe is supposed to be interesting." James was already drafting protocols for their next planetary first contact mission. "Besides," he said with the confidence of someone who had just redefined the fundamental nature of interplanetary relationships, "we're humans. Making the impossible seem routine is what we do." Behind them, the galaxy was beginning to wake up to the reality that the universe was much more crowded, much more interesting, and much more talkative than anyone had ever imagined. And at the center of this transformation were 3 humans who had approached an impossible problem with the simple assumption that impossible things were just things that nobody had figured out how to do yet. The ripple effects of their success were about to change everything. 6 months after the Kepler 442b incident, the phrase "you hired humans" had transformed from an expression of disbelief into a mark of progressive business thinking. What had once been considered corporate desperation was now viewed as forward-thinking innovation. And the 3 humans who had started it all found themselves at the center of the most significant economic transformation in galactic history. The Interstellar Commerce Center on New Geneva Station had been expanded twice to accommodate the flood of new trade relationships between mobile species and geological entities. The Planetary Consciousness Registry, a bureaucratic department that hadn't existed a year earlier, now employed over 4,000 beings from 17 different species to process applications from worlds seeking recognition as sentient entities. Marcus stood in the center of the newly constructed Geological Diplomacy Department, surrounded by monitoring equipment that tracked communications with 43 different conscious planets across 12 star systems. Each world had its own personality, its own trade specializations, and its own unique approach to interspecies relations. The diversity was staggering and delightful. "Status report from Vega Prime," announced Dr. Calaris, a quantum whose crystalline form had adapted specialized resonance chambers for planetary communication. "The consciousness there has successfully negotiated a rare earth metals contract with the Centaurian Industrial Consortium. Profit margins are exceeding projections by 200%. "Excellent," Marcus replied, making notes on his tablet. "What about the Sirius Systems Survey?" 3 confirmed conscious worlds, 2 probable candidates, and 1 entity that appears to be a collective consciousness spread across an entire asteroid belt, reported Dr. Yelena, an Aquilin whose feathered crest had developed new patterns that somehow enhanced her ability to interpret geological emotions. "The asteroid collective is particularly interesting. It's been redistributing valuable minerals throughout the belt for thousands of years, apparently trying to create artistic patterns that could be visible from interstellar distances." Marcus grinned. "Cosmic scale sculpture. I love it. Are they interested in trade negotiations?" "Very much so. They've been hoping to sell their artistic arrangements to species that appreciate large-scale aesthetic achievements. The Ethereal Arts Council is already expressing interest." Across the department, Sarah was working with a team of engineers from 8 different species to design communication protocols that could accommodate the growing diversity of geological intelligences they were discovering. Each world thought differently, processed information at different speeds, and communicated through different combinations of electromagnetic fields, gravitational fluctuations, and quantum resonance patterns. "The challenge," she explained to her multi-species engineering team, "is creating universal translation protocols that can handle entities whose thought processes operate on geological timescales. When a planet says, 'I'll get back to you shortly,' It might mean anything from a few minutes to several decades. How do we solve for that? Asked engineer Boardhack, a methodical Urson whose species had built their reputation on precise scheduling and timeline management. Adaptive temporal scaling, Sarah replied, activating a holographic display that showed their latest communication interface design. The system monitors the cognitive processing speed of each geological entity and adjusts communication protocols to match their natural rhythms. Fast-thinking worlds like Kepler 442b can maintain real-time conversations. Slower entities get extended processing periods built into the communication framework. What about worlds that think faster than biological entities? Asked Dr. Zexera, a quantum engineer whose species existed partially outside normal space-time. We found 3 so far, Sarah admitted. They're challenging. Their thought processes operate on nanosecond intervals, which means they experience our conversations the way we might experience geological epochs. We're developing specialized AI interfaces that can think fast enough to keep up with them. The economic implications of the expanding network of conscious worlds had exceeded everyone's most optimistic projections. Planets that could manage their own resources proved to be incredibly efficient partners. They could optimize mineral concentrations, develop custom alloys, and even engineer new geological formations to meet specific industrial requirements. More importantly, they were enthusiastic participants in galactic culture. Conscious worlds were commissioning artistic projects, funding scientific research, and even developing their own forms of entertainment that involved reshaping their surface features to create constantly changing landscape narratives. The planet Arcturus 7 had become famous throughout the galaxy for its geological soap opera, an ongoing drama performed through strategic mountain building and erosion that had been running continuously for over 3,000 years. Beings traveled from across known space to observe the latest plot developments, and betting on character relationships had become a popular form of interstellar gambling. James found himself in the unlikely position of serving as the galaxy's first planetary cultural liaison, a job that involved helping geological entities understand mobile species customs while explaining planetary perspectives to beings who had never considered that rocks might have opinions. The fundamental cultural difference, he explained to a gathering of diplomats, corporate executives, and xenosociology professors, is temporal perspective. Most mobile species think in terms of years or decades. Planetary consciousnesses think in terms of millennia or geological ages. This creates interesting challenges for trade negotiations, relationship building, and project planning. How do you resolve conflicts that arise from such different timescales? Asked Ambassador Thelvix from the Diplomatic Corps, whose species specialized in interstellar conflict resolution. Patience and creative scheduling, James replied. For example, Kepler 442b considers our partnership to still be in the getting-to-know-each-other phase, even though we've been working together for 6 months. From its perspective, we've barely exchanged introductions. But it's also willing to engage in short-term projects to accommodate our faster decision-making rhythms. What about cultural exchange programs? Inquired Dr. Morleff from the Galactic University's Xenosociology department. James smiled. That's where things get really interesting. Several conscious worlds have expressed fascination with the concept of mobility, the ability to travel and see different places. They can't move themselves, but they're creating specialized mineral formations that they want to send as representatives to other star systems. Living ambassadorial crystals, mused Ambassador Thelvix. Geological entities that carry aspects of their home world's consciousness to facilitate diplomatic relations with distant species. Exactly. We're also working on reciprocal programs where mobile species can establish long-term residencies on conscious worlds, becoming integrated into planetary thought processes while maintaining their individual identities. It's like a cultural exchange program between different types of consciousness. The success of planetary partnership agreements had triggered a complete restructuring of galactic economics. The Resource Extraction Federation had transformed itself into the Planetary Partnership Council. Mining corporations had become geological consulting firms, and entirely new industries had emerged to facilitate trade between mobile and stationary intelligences. The most surprising development was the emergence of hybrid technologies, innovations that combined mobile engineering with geological capabilities in ways that neither approach could achieve independently. Conscious worlds could grow crystalline computer systems with processing capabilities that exceeded conventional artificial intelligence. Mobile species provided the rapid adaptability and creative problem-solving skills that complemented planetary long-term planning. We're seeing the development of truly symbiotic technological relationships. Marcus explained to a gathering of galactic business leaders who were trying to understand how to adapt their operations to the new economic reality. Planets that specialize in advanced material science, working with mobile species that excel at rapid prototyping and iterative design. What are the practical applications? Asked Director Colvin from the Advanced Technology Consortium. Starships with hulls that can self-repair by following geological growth patterns. Communication systems that use planetary consciousness as living amplifiers for interstellar messages. Even terraforming projects where conscious worlds collaborate with mobile species to design optimal environmental conditions for different forms of life. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Several major corporations had struggled to adapt their business models to partnership-based relationships rather than extraction-based operations. Legal systems had required extensive revision to accommodate entities whose lifespans were measured in geological ages. And there have been a few unfortunate incidents when mobile species had attempted to negotiate with planets that turn out to be hostile to outsiders. Not all conscious worlds are friendly, Sarah warned during a safety briefing for new geological diplomacy specialists. We've encountered 3 entities that actively dislike mobile species, 2 that consider us parasites, and 1 that appears to view biological consciousness as a form of mental illness that should be cured through forced crystallization. How do we identify potentially hostile geological entities? Asked trainee specialist Yilkoth, a young Centaurian who was preparing for his first planetary contact mission. The same way you identify potentially hostile mobile species, Sarah replied. Careful observation, respectful initial contact, and immediate withdrawal if they express disinterest in communication. The difference is that hostile planets have more dramatic ways of expressing their displeasure than hostile mobile species, such as localized gravity manipulation, targeted seismic events, and electromagnetic fields that can fry most electronic equipment, Marcus added cheerfully. The planet Rigel 7 once expressed its annoyance with uninvited visitors by creating a temporary black hole that lasted just long enough to pull their ships into orbit and then spit them back out in the general direction of their home system. Despite the occasional challenges, the integration of geological consciousness into galactic civilization had been overwhelmingly successful. Trade volume had increased by 400%. Scientific advancement had accelerated dramatically through collaboration between mobile creativity and planetary long-term research projects. And the cultural enrichment from exposure to truly alien forms of consciousness had sparked artistic and philosophical renaissance movements throughout known space. The 3 humans who had started it all found themselves in the peculiar position of being simultaneously famous and bewildered by their own success. They had approached what seemed like an impossible mining problem with curiosity and open-mindedness, and accidentally triggered the most significant expansion of galactic civilization since the discovery of faster-than-light travel. Do you think we've changed things for the better? Sarah asked one evening as they sat in their shared office, surrounded by communication arrays that linked them to conscious worlds throughout the galaxy. Definitely, Marcus replied, watching as a message from Kepler 442b scrolled across his display in patterns of light that had become as familiar as written text. The galaxy is more interesting, more diverse, and more collaborative than it was before. We've given a voice to intelligences that have been waiting to join the conversation for millennia. James was reviewing requests for consultation on first contact missions to 17 different star systems where survey teams had detected signs of possible geological consciousness. More importantly, we've established the principle that intelligence can take forms that we never expected. That opens possibilities for future discoveries that we can't even imagine yet. What's next? Sarah asked, studying a proposal from a Galactic Scientific Council for a comprehensive survey of potentially conscious astronomical phenomena throughout known space. Talking stars? Sentient nebulae? Conscious galaxies? Why not? Marcus grinned. 6 months ago, talking planets seemed impossible. Now we're partners with 43 different geological entities, and applications for planetary consciousness recognition are arriving faster than we can process them. The universe, James observed, keeps turning out to be more alive and more talkative than anyone expects. And humans seem to be particularly good at starting conversations with things that other species assume can't talk back. Outside their window, New Geneva Station continued its eternal dance of interstellar commerce. But now the ships arriving and departing carried not just cargo and passengers, but ambassadorial crystals from conscious worlds, artistic creations from geological entities, and custom-designed materials that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. The transformation had become self-sustaining. Each new conscious world that joined the galactic community made it easier to detect and communicate with others. Each successful partnership demonstrated the benefits of collaboration between mobile and geological intelligence. And each impossible thing that became routine opened minds to new possibilities that had previously been unthinkable. You know, Sarah said thoughtfully, when we took that first job for Zenith Solutions, I thought we were just solving an unusual mining problem. Marcus pointed out, we just solved it by changing the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. James smiled as he approved funding for 12 new geological diplomacy training programs that would teach thousands of beings from dozens of species how to recognize and communicate with planetary consciousness. That's the thing about impossible problems. Sometimes the only way to solve them is to make them possible. The 3 humans who had convinced the galaxy to reconsider its assumptions about consciousness, intelligence, and partnership had become living proof that the universe was always more interesting than anyone imagined, and that the most impossible things were often just the most important things that nobody had figured out how to do yet. Behind them, a message from a newly discovered conscious world in the Proxima Centauri system appeared on their communication array, expressing excitement about joining the galactic community and asking if the humans might be available for a consultation about establishing trade relationships with mobile species. Marcus reached for his tablet to schedule another impossible assignment. After all, someone had to keep making the impossible look routine.